At American Airlines, we're investing in our customer experience to make travel with us more convenient and comfortable. Manage your trip with our app, from booking flights to checking bags and more, all at your fingertips. And you can relax before your flight in one of our updated Admirals Club lounges. Plus, with the American Airlines Advantage program, it's simple and easy to earn rewards from flying and spending. See all the ways we're making travel better at aa.com. You are why we fly.
Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host Gordon Smith, and this week I'm joined by co-host Jay Shabat. In part 1, we're discussing all things Air Canada, and in part 2, we're looking at the global winners and losers for Q2 so far. Hi Jay, how's it going?
I'm good, Gordon. How are you?
Doing very, very, very well. 3 verys this week. We spend a lot of time on this podcast, and I think in the industry generally, talking about the United States. But the US's northern neighbor, there's also some interesting things going on, not least in their quite turbulent low-cost sector. But at the other end of the scale, Air Canada has been doing some interesting stuff as well. They've been sort of going with their 3-hub approach with Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. That's been working nicely for them. They've been getting deeper into parts of Asia. We might be discussing that in a moment. So we thought it was high time just to give Air Canada a little bit of our attention. We covered JetBlue, Jet2, I should say, last week on the show. So let's give a carrier that's sometimes overlooked a little attention here, Jay. What do our listeners need to know about Air Canada at the moment?
Sure. So as we're speaking, Air Canada had just reported a few days ago their second quarter results. We are speaking on August 14th here, so a little bit by the time you're all listening to this, be a little bit ahead of that. But this nothing we say should change materially here. And Air Canada reported an 8% operating margin for the second quarter. Nothing to really celebrate or throw any parties about, because remember that in the U.S., the big carriers there, so the comparable, the peer set of Air Canada, let's say United, Delta, and American, they all did better than that. So even American, we've talked about some of their troubles. They had a 10% margin in the second quarter. So Air Canada just 8.4. Now, a year ago, Air Canada in the same quarter did 15%. So something happened between last year or last spring and this spring. And the obvious question is, well, what happened? And a couple of things, just to make it simple. Things definitely cooled down as far as demand goes. You also have quite a bit of cost inflation that I think the whole airline industry has experienced. Air Canada, definitely some of that. And Air Canada they are a very intercontinental airline. They certainly have a domestic market, and they do some short haul down into the U.S., of course. But a lot of their network is long haul intercontinental, and that seems to be still doing well, just not quite as gangbusters as it was a year ago. I think that was there's been some more capacity in some of those markets, and I think some of them just sort of cooled off after that sort of post-pandemic high that a lot of carriers around the world have seen. So there's just a brief sort of snapshot of Air Canada.
And is it a bit harsh to compare them to the US Big Three? They've got a very different operating environment, a lot more transcontinental stuff. Not that the US Big Three don't, but by definition, Canada is more sparsely populated. They've got a different sort of playing field. To put them up against the Deltas, Uniteds, and the Americans of this world, is that fair?
Maybe not. And there are a couple of things that distinguish Air Canada from the U.S. Big Three. Now, you might say, well, Air Canada's not, they're maybe not as strong as the Big Three in the U.S. because their market is smaller, but there are a lot of other carriers around the world who maybe have lower cost or maybe have some other advantages. Now, in the case of Air Canada, I'd say like two big differences with the Big Three, two big disadvantages is one, Canada can be a higher cost market to serve than the U.S., in part because airport costs tend to be higher. I guess I've heard some people say, some people involved on the ground say that cost differential is converging, and that may be the case. But it's always been kind of an expensive market to serve, and that's one reason why you don't see too many U.S. low cost carriers really going into Canada. I mean, JetBlue doesn't serve Canada, I don't believe, and Southwest doesn't. So that's one reason. And then another big reason is that because the population of Canada is so much smaller, it's whatever a tenth of the size of the U.S. The U.S. carriers just have these massive loyalty programs that are extremely lucrative, whereas Air Canada does have a very strong loyalty plan, but it's just a fraction of the size. So fair point you make there, Gordon, that you can't really make you shouldn't really compare these two in a strict sense.
Yeah, it can be quite easy, quite tempting to make oversimplistic comparisons between the two countries, but yeah, you don't need to be a North American expert to know that they are very different beasts. On JetBlue, I think they do serve Vancouver, as memory. I think they may serve there.
Oh, are they in Vancouver? Okay, and that's, I believe, pretty recent. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I think that's pretty recent, right?
Yeah, I think they were putting the 220 potentially in there. Need to double check that.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. You think you're right about that.
Well, we'll have a post bag full of Canadian stamped letters telling us
Yeah, that's
otherwise.
right.
Jay, what about Air Canada Rouge? You're talking about cost bases and how it can be an expensive place to operate out of. Air Canada Rouge, for listeners who aren't familiar, that's a sort of lower cost, more leisure focused subsidiary of Air Canada Mainline. That could help with some of the routes that might not be able to support the full bells and whistles operation. Could you do a bit more of that to help shore up that overall margin?
Yeah, and I'll address that in a moment. I while you were talking, I did double check, and as usual, Gordon is correct. And
Jay, please.
no. That's you did. That's a fair. I'm being fair on that one. I may not be fair on comparing Air Canada to the U.S. guys, but I'm being fair in extending my praise to my esteemed colleague here, because he's absolutely. You're absolutely right. They do serve Vancouver, and it looks like they started in about earlier this 2022 or maybe up to 2021. But they New York, JFK to Vancouver.
Got it. But your general point about U.S. carriers on the low cost side not really wanting to breach the threshold of their northern neighbor's border is broadly correct, I would say.
Right. Yeah. And to address your question about Rouge, they started that back in the 2010s, I believe it was, may have been even a little earlier, and it was designed to address the fact that Air Canada has always had labor costs, and they kind of labor costs are relatively high, and they saw a lot of opportunity to expand, but they were worried that maybe some of these expansion markets, particularly the ones that are leisure heavy, wouldn't work with their cost base. So they got their pilots to agree to sort of lower cost, maybe call them B scale. Sometimes you see that term used, different set of wage rates, and I'm not even sure off the top of my head if that's still. There is a wage differential still. It may be where the cost differentials come from other aspects of the business model, whether it be seat densification or whatever. But in any case, one of the reasons why I don't know the answer off the top of my head because it just hasn't really been that important of a tool to them. I think when they first created it, they may have envisioned it as being potentially very important. And I think at this point, it does serve a few routes here and there, but it was never anything that they grew very, rapidly or so it's a little bit of an afterthought at this point. Most of their growth, their interesting growth is coming on, mainline service. And it's actually quite remarkable that they still, after all these years, do have ongoing expansion opportunities on the long haul. And they've been able to really support that. One, because they have not one hub, not two hub, but three viable hubs for intercontinental, and that's Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Another reason is they've done a good job ordering the right planes. I think the 787 is a great tool for them. Another very important aspect of being able to support all that new intercontinental service is that they've been able to source a lot of demand from particularly the U.S., where what they practice what's called Sixth Freedom strategy, where you'll actually get someone from, I'm just making this up, but Chicago, and that person will fly into Montreal, and then from there they'll go on to Paris. So it's basically demand originating in one country, flying to a third country via Canada. And so they've been very successful in just growing their U.S. Network and feeding that into their broader intercontinental network. And not just U.S. I think they source, you can picture someone from Brazil going to Tokyo or something like that. It's they have hubs that work for that just geographically. And they've used their loyalty program to help support some of that growth. And so that's all been good. And the other thing I should mention about the Canadian market is that's very helpful for an international airline, is that the Canadian population is very international. It's just a lot of immigration, so a lot of migrants that either come from a different country, or their parents or grandparents come from different countries. There's a lot of travel moving back and forth into and out of Canada, and those immigration levels have really gone up a lot just in the past couple of years. So every time that Air Canada presents to, whether it be Wall Street or Bay Street or to investors, they'll always talk about that they consider that an advantage of having, being based in a population that's very internationally, just people from all over the world live in Canada.
A good bit of VFR, as we like to say in the industry.
Yeah.
Visiting friends and relatives is what we describe. And Jay, we had some news just today as we're speaking on August 14th from Air Canada, and you mentioned international expansion, and it's quite impressive, frankly, that they're still able to find new dots on the route map. Vancouver proving to be a very, very attractive Pacific hub, getting down into Singapore and other parts of Far East Asia. They are also expanding transatlantic. So we had news today that they are resuming their Ottawa to Heathrow service nonstop, beginning in spring 2025, 4 times weekly seasonal flights, beginning March 31st, 2025, the only Canadian airline connecting Ottawa to Europe on a scheduled basis. That's by the by. However, I wanted to bring up this particular nugget because Mark Garaldo, forgive me, Mark, if I've mispronounced your name, EVP of Revenue and Network Planning at Air Canada, said as follows: "We are looking forward to the future delivery of Air Canada's new Airbus A321 XLR fleet." A bit of PR puff. But it said, interestingly at the end there, Mark, that is, arriving in late 2025, it will enable us to consider operating this important international route with greater frequencies and potentially year-round service. So I think that's quite bold of an airline that usually don't like to overpromise to say, we haven't even relaunched this Ottawa to Heathrow seasonal service yet, but we're already talking about it going year-round with the XLR. Perhaps a taste of things to come.
Right, and it just goes to the point about how their international expansion their international strategy still has room to grow. I mean, here we have, in this case, Ottawa, which isn't even one of those hubs I mentioned. Ottawa is a relatively small city. The federal capital is there, so you have some business, but it's not, it's nothing that they're going to build into a global hub to rival Toronto or anything like that. But but you can see that there's some opportunity there. And then, as you mentioned, getting those XLRs, which is a narrow body plane, is you can't think of a better market than Eastern Canada for those aircraft, because you take a plane that's like I said, it's just narrow body in size, so that alone entails lower risk than going out and buying a much more expensive wide body. Yet you can fly it all the way over to Western Europe, pretty deep into Europe, actually. The XLR is that's what it stands for, extra long range. So that is will be another tool in Air Canada's arsenal to further expand their international network.
Yeah, really interesting. And not every
airline 787-10s as well, which is that'll be interesting for them too.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hodgepodge of a fleet. Currently, I think they've still got some 767s and the 777s, the 787s, the A330s. It's a big airline, but arguably could do with a little bit of streamlining, and I'm sure that will come when the XLRs start to arrive. I think Iberia is still due to be the global launch customer for the XLR in the coming weeks as we're speaking here, and we'll be sure to keep you abreast of that rollout in Airline Weekly. Anything to add on Air Canada before we head into the break, Jay?
Well, and just to put a date on the for Air Canada, they said, and of course there have been a lot of delays, so nobody should hold their breaths in a paper bag or anything. But it's they said that their first A321 XLR will start coming next fall.
Got it. Okay. Well, mark your diaries. And if you're particularly keen, get yourself to Spain. And then probably Aer Lingus after that. They were due to be the first, but a few well-documented labor issues prevented that from happening. Great. Thanks for covering off Air Canada, Jay. And just before we go into the break, a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a amazing new email address, podcasts@skift.com. That's podcast with an S. If you've got any questions, comments, or feedback for us and the wider podcast team. And don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching us. And if you are enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate if you could rate us 5 stars, leave us a positive review, whatever the platform allows, so we can continue to spread the word about the Airline Weekly Lounge and continue delivering the podcast week in, week out, even when we're on vacation, free of charge. Don't go anywhere. In part 2, we are going to be looking at the global winners and losers so far for Q2.
Everyone loves travel, but if you're listening to Airline Weekly Lounge, you really love travel. The American Airlines Advantage program is made for travelers like you because it's easy and simple to earn through everyday spend. Your next dinner out can help you earn towards status. So can that online shopping spree before your next flight. Learn all the ways the American Airlines Advantage program works for you at aa.com/radio.
Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Gordon Smith. This week, joined by co-host Jay Shabat. Part 1, we were discussing Air Canada. Part 2, we're taking a far more global perspective. We're going to look at who had a slightly rough Q2 and who's been doing really, really well so far, with the caveat, because we don't have all the numbers in. And of course, not every big name airline, you probably know them by now, report quarterly earnings. Some don't report their earnings at all. But Jay, of those that we do have, which is a pretty significant quorum, let's delve in. What are the headline numbers, the headline facts that our listeners need to know?
Yeah, so as of August 14th, and we are, so we still don't have some, like you said, Gordon, we're kind of well into second quarter earnings season. So we have the majority of airlines that do report already have reported, but we do have, the big Chinese carriers have yet to report. A few others that are noteworthy. For example, Gol in Brazil. And who else do we have here? I'm just looking at our list here, Aegean of Greece. So you can see we're kind of getting down to the end here. So as of today, so far, the leader is Air Arabia in the United Arab Emirates. They're in Sharjah, right near Dubai. And their operating margin for the second quarter is 21%. So let's give them a round of applause. Now, the one caveat is that Air Arabia, they do report their quarterly results. However, it's not the most transparent airline in the world. They no longer do earnings calls, at least not ones that are publicly accessible. They used to years ago, and it's been a long time since. So we don't really know where that's coming from. And I suspect that some of those profits are coming from the non-airline businesses. They do have a host of, they operate everything from hotels to, an IT company, maintenance and tour operators and all sorts of stuff like that. And the airline is still the majority of their business for sure. But I suspect that the margins get a little bit inflated by some of those auxiliary businesses. But in any case, we'll give them credit for their 21%. Right behind them is Copa, 19%. They are routinely among the big winning airlines. And then the only one I'll just mention here at the top, so EVA Air from Taiwan, they're at 18%. Something's going right there, and I suspect it has a lot to do with their Trans-Pacific flights, where demand is just very strong right now. And they do have a big cargo operation too. The cargo is not quite as producing as quite the profits that it was right during the pandemic, but I think it's still pretty strong. All of this artificial intelligence investment, companies like Google and Amazon are doing. A lot of that require chips that come from Taiwan, and airlines like EVA, China Airlines are doing a lot of that, transporting a lot of that stuff to the data centers in the United States or whatever. So I think they're still doing well on the cargo side as well. So that's a little bit of taste of what we're seeing in Q2 so far.
Thanks for that, Jay. And I saw on LinkedIn you shared some of those numbers, and you put a bit of a health warning around the EVA Air number. You said you're going to take a little bit of a look into that. Interesting that it is such a robust figure, particularly when you've got newcomers entering the market, those that are maybe returned to Taipei after a while. I'm thinking maybe Delta putting in a good bit more capacity in there, but also Starlux, the brand new Taipei-based carrier. Whispers abound that it could be ultimately joining One World. Not sure if Cathay just across the water would agree with that. But the fact is you've got a lot more capacity coming into Taipei, at least in the post-pandemic period. Plus there's brand new sort of bells and whistles operator. I flew on Starlux's A350 down to Bangkok last year. It's a phenomenal aircraft, full class, depending on your definition of what constitutes a first class cabin. And yeah, if you can go up against them, and then they've stretched the legs now into LA, into Seattle and San Francisco on the Trans-Pacific, much deeper into Asia. If you can go up against them, plus China Airlines, which is a very respectable competitor as well, plus all the other global stuff that's going on and still post high teens, then I agree with you, Jay. You're doing something right.
Yeah, it is a very competitive market. And by the way, Starlux, the other potential news about them is they may be going public soon, which, from what I understand, I mean, we're just from reading reports out of Taiwan, and there's nothing that makes me happier than seeing an airline go public, because that means they are required to report their financial results and publish their financial statements, so we can get a better picture of what's going on there. But you're right to say that what was once a 2-airline market is now a 3-airline market, and you would think that extra competition would weigh on EVA Air's results, but obviously they're doing something right. I think there's so much capacity that was taken out of the market from mainland China to North America that just hasn't come back. I mean, that's the largest really market worldwide that is nowhere near where it was pre-pandemic. And so I suspect that a lot of some of that traffic anyway is getting funneled, through some of those Asian hubs. I mean, Korean Air talks about that as well. It gets a little trickier and with Taiwan because of the relations with the mainland, but I suspect that that's been helpful. Now, China Airlines has and they're not, interesting enough, China Airlines is doing fine, but they're not posting these kind of numbers like that EVA is. So it makes you wonder why. And one theory is that they aren't as exposed. It could be because that they aren't as exposed to the U.S. market as EVA is.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to, you can fly direct, nonstop, New York JFK to Taipei. That's a long one. Jay, they are some of the best performing carriers so far of the airlines that we've got access to the accounts.
What about those? Guess you're going to ask about the losers next.
Oh, I thought I was a journalist. I thought I considered myself to be a sort of a nimble interrogator, questionnaire. But yeah, you've rumbled me, Jay. I'm going to go from the winners to the losers. Who'd have thought it? Let me ask you again. Who have we got towards the bottom of the list?
Well, Poor Spirit is at the very bottom, and it's negative 13% is their number. Just had an awful quarter, and the reasons are many. We talked about some of the GTF engine issues that they're facing. They're not the only one, though, so we can't use that alone as an excuse. They have cost issues. They have market issues. I think they maybe put too much capacity into markets like Orlando, and now they're trying to find new homes for those airplanes and having trouble doing that. I think they're, in fairness, the GTF issues have been a real headache for them, and they so much so that they just don't have the planes to. Let's put it this way: they hired X number of people, X number of pilots, thinking that they would fly X number of flights. The engine problems make it so that they can't fly those flights. So now they're going to have to furlough a lot of pilots, which you never want to see. But it's not a good situation at Spirit. Of course, we know what happened with their merger with JetBlue. They were supposed to combine with them, and the judge said no. And now they're hemorrhaging cash and trying to. I don't want to use the word bankruptcy because that's a little bit maybe too alarmist, but certainly the liquidity and cash preservation and renegotiating things like debt contracts or whatever is on the agenda there. So bad situation. Not too far below there is Hawaiian, negative 7%. Now Hawaiian, same situation. They're looking to consolidation for salvation. They're going to merge with Alaska Airlines if the competition regulators say okay, and the review has been delayed. But maybe by the time you're listening to this, we might have an answer. If not, probably sometime early or mid fall. So all eyes on that. And the only other two airlines that we have so far, the publicly reporting carriers that have reported a negative number, a loss so far for the second quarter, is Skymark in Japan. They're a low cost carrier, and Play, which is an airline in Iceland. They're sort of startup and trying to compete with Iceland. They're negative 6%. So a little bit of concern there, although maybe some seasonal issues too. I mean, second quarter should be okay for Iceland's, not quite first quarter, but maybe the Easter shift and a few other reasons why maybe we'll give them some leeway. But Iceland Air itself, by the way, only had 1%, so they were not too much better. So there's the bottom of the list.
Thank you, Jay. And I wonder how different Skymark's 2024 numbers could have been if they bought those A380s.
Oh, yeah, that was Skymark has an illustrious history, and I say that facetiously. They used to, they used to have a CEO who let's say he had rather large ambitions, and they were happy. He went over a little bit out over his skis by ordering A380s and really bankrupted the company, and then eventually All Nippon came in and took those A380s off its hands, and those are now in the Hawaiian market. Actually, ANA is flying those from Tokyo to Hawaii, and Skymark is now back to being a more normal narrow body only low cost carrier. They're getting Maxes, and hopefully trying to find a little bit of a niche right below the two big guys, Japan Airlines and All Nippon.
For sure. And speaking of CEO comments or ideas, we should say that Ted Christie, Spirit Airlines CEO, he previously described analyst speculation, not yours specifically, Jay, but the Wall Street types, that Spirit could face bankruptcy as, quote, a misguided narrative advanced by an assortment of pundits. Who'd have thought it? And last month, he told shareholders at an annual meeting that the carrier is not considering Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And of course, Spirit has had a bit of a premium push very, very late last month, July 30th. They announced huge changes to the passenger proposition. Read all about it in the back issues of Airline Weekly. To go into more detail, it's you can go big and get a big front seat and an alcoholic drink and a checked-in bag and basically all the trimmings you'd expect on a legacy carrier for, according to Spirit, not much more money. Jay, thank you for running us through those Q2 numbers. Much appreciated. Anything to add before we wrap up?
No, I look forward to presenting the complete list once everybody has reported, and that should probably come sometime early fall, maybe when we're into the second or third week of September, somewhere around there. And we'll see, like I said, how the Chinese carriers did, and a few of the other stragglers that are still putting their numbers together.
Absolutely, and we've got a couple of weeks rather to bring together all those numbers, because the next scheduled issue of Airline Weekly, the publication that is, will be on September the 9th, Monday, September 9th, after our summer break. But please do feel free to get in touch with us between now and then. You can send any questions, comments that you might have for us to podcasts@skift.com. That's podcasts with an S. Thanks as always to producer Monica for making us sound as good as she can. And thanks as well to Jay, of course. And if you do need your fix of airline news whilst Airline Weekly is on its summer break, don't forget you can go to skift.com. And if you're an Airline Weekly subscriber, you get access to all of the airline news there on Skift. Wherever you are in the world, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.